Vamos a dar paso a Marta Albert. Marta Albert
is going to present the lecture, To Be Born from an Act of Love, the Dignity of the Child, director of the Master in Bioethics of the Rey Juan Carlos University, Madrid in Spain, professor of Philosophy of Law of the Rey Juan Carlos University in Madrid. She is in the Royal Academy of Jurisprudence and Legislation, Master in Bioethics, Informazione by the Giovanni Paolo II Institute in Rome. She is chairing the Master in Rey Juan Carlos University, editor of bioethics books, and she belongs to the board of the EBI. She is leading the Rey Juan Carlos University in the European project Be Better Informed About Fertility, participates in the project on equality and non-discrimination in pharmaceutical care to transsexual people in Spain. Thank you very much, Professor Marta Albert. Thank you. Microphone, please. Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I think I can take away my mask. Oh, what a relief. Well, good afternoon, those of you who are here and those of you who are abroad in the online world. Thank you very much to the organizers for having invited me for this lecture. I feel very honored and very grateful as well for having this opportunity of listening to all the speakers who have been speaking before me. The title of my lecture, as you can see, is To Be Born of an Act of Love, the Dignity of the Child. The first thing I would like to clarify, although it's quite self-explanatory, is that every child, absolutely independently of the conditions in which it's conceived, is equally digne. But what I would like to point out with my lecture is that these conditions are exactly those that can be more or less respectful with the dignity of the child. Habermas said that how we treat the issue of conception and life even before being a bodily life or at the moment or when it is created defines us as a species. It is part of our self-understanding. And I believe that the issue is that sometimes we don't stop to think about it with the depth it really deserves. And that's why we are here, maybe obviously without making any value judgment nor on people nor on their actions either. What it's all about here is to try to show that invisibility of everything that happens when a person is conceived. As I said before, it's an issue that very often is overlooked or we have socially assumed without dedicating too much time to it, to reflect upon it. As has already been explained by Professor Lacalle, well, and that's something that I'm not going to repeat, and also you don't have to listen to say the same thing again. It's indispensable to be placed in the setting of the revolution of May '68, the graffiti revolution as well. I have here my own graffiti. This is one of the most well-known. Revolution and sex did go hand in hand in that occasion. But as Hadjad says, it's true that at the end that explosion, that burst of sex ended in its disappearance, if not its disappearance, at least practically, nearly. The sex is diluted against the concept of gender. Judy Ball said, we are going to end saying, yesterday I had gender with somebody because now I'm a lawyer. These are things that may happen. And it is true that as a civil status, well, that the disappearance of sex is something real. hence the radical importance of the lecture given by Dr. Granada. But this means something. The play of sex and gender has a lot to do with the fact that the nature is mute, has nothing to tell us, and on the other hand, the construction, the social construction has its saying there. In this setting, we always talk about the fact that sex is released mainly by the from the heaviest consequence, the generation of children. Sex is freed from reproduction, but we look less at the fact that practically at the same historical time, the reproduction is also freed from sex. And both things happened practically at the same time. And with the pill on the one side, the reproduction techniques, the assisted reproduction techniques, etc., we have a totally new panorama: sex without children, children without sex. Well, this is something that really is very important. To be from procreation being something as the undesired consequence of the very satisfaction of a drive, it then becomes into a voluntary act, an intentional act, well reflected upon very often. Better consider, the greater the reflection you give to it. And it's legitimating itself on the name of that will of being part of the parental project or reproductive project or the will of procreation of the person. These are the expressions that are used, legally speaking, to justify the modifications that we see in the surrogate maternity, paternity, and maternity and fatherhood, etc. The issue is that not only is sex that is freed, but also the reproduction not only is freed from sex, but also from the sexual difference itself as well. The last project, I don't know if this is the very last version, I think there will be two of the laws of identity, gender identity, already talk about persons with gestational desire, of persons just. But it's only just the summit from this, the end of this liberation process. The issue I would like to put forward here now today is that I believe that it's not so much contraception as the being owner of the conception that really is a revolutionary thing and that has really changed the mentality and the paradigm of coming to this world, of being born in this world. And what has happened is that we are own now the generation of others, and this is very important. They donum vitae, they describe this process as what is happening is that the generation is included in the logic of mastering, and that this is breaking the human will. And on the other hand, as I said before, I believe that this appreciation is not out of focus, not even, and I don't even think it's exaggerated. I think it's quite correct, by the way. I will defend it with arguments of different thinkers who are not religious or don't present their thought from that point of view. I believe it is worthwhile to stop thinking now that what has entered now in the logic of this being the masters of something that doesn't have to be bad as long as, and in some specific context, it's an action that ends in oneself. I'm thinking as a lawyer now and an expert in law, but the problem is what we are introducing inside the rationale of power involves other human beings that is coming to the world, involves its coming to the world, the coming to the world of that new being. And I already said I'm thinking as a jurist, and that's where the problem of justice, equality, and freedom are into play when we are in a setting when there is more than one. And that's why I believe that the issue of the child is absolutely at the center. And it is meaningful to talk about equality and freedom, the basic ingredients of justice, because justice is what happens or not happens, but should happen when there are two persons or more that are in a relationship. I explain briefly why I do think that this happens and how it happens. I'm going to simply talk about 3 issues. There are more. The issue is practically very difficult to encompass because it affects several environments of our life, or domains of our life. But in general terms, Professor Lacalle has already mentioned that, by the way. What I would like to convey to you is that it seems that when we become the owners of this phenomenon, mysterious phenomenon of conception, and when we establish on this phenomenon and understand it in terms of power relations, we lose the sense of paternity, fatherhood and maternity and parentage. It's necessary to expropriate conception. And I would point out 3 issues that I believe are symptomatic, in my opinion. First of all, parentage and the modification, the very deep modification that we are seeing, that little by little is happening. And also the issue of parental responsibility and all these issues that are now every day, that we very often are quite scared of it, or the anti-birth movements, etc. Where does such an idea come from? And finally, the central issue, that is the unfair treatment with respect to the child of this desire. The first one is that there it is. In 2 different aspects. On the one side, we have the progressive extensions of the users, men and women, of reproduction techniques. Most of the cases, it's understood as an expansion of the rights or the right holders. But this is something that is never existed, the link between the use of the techniques and the cure of sterility of something of that sort that doesn't correspond with reality. At the end, I'm not talking about attempts. We have not suffered them, but other countries in our environment, yes, of legalizing the surrogate maternity. The parentage is built in order to give parents to the children that require them, not to give children to parents that want to have children. And it seems we don't see that. And we jurists we are quite realistic. And what we have seen since the legal institution of parentage does exist is that to have children is not a good thing. It's a terrible responsibility. And when they are very nice, when they are babies, the things then varies. And then, well, things change. But we who are parents, we do understand that very well. It is true that the whole issue is, it's not a father the one who desires the child most, not the woman because she's giving birth. It's just that she is pointed at by the community, and she has to assume the consequences of the coming to life of this child as the partner. That is basically the end of the aim of marriage. The participation of the male in all this is much more smoother, but there has to be somebody who is going to take in charge this responsibility, and it's absolutely the reverse that is happening. And this is changing now, and more so. People think that children should belong to those who want to have them, and this is absolutely a mistake with practical consequences that we all know. Apart from the fact of having children or being parents, that the right to have it doesn't exist, to have that the freedom to have them or not, but not the right. That means to have a positive action on other people that have to be involved so that you have those children. I'm not saying that. This is what the European Court of Human Rights says. So all these problems that somehow have to do with this fact that we become owners of this generation of children. They are mine because I have loved, I wanted them. It's not because you have to breed them and you have to, because that's the other side of the coin. This turns against the parents, because if we are owners of the conception of the children, you can't prevent for them to then ask you, why did you have me if my life is meaningless? If I have an enormous disability, I don't want to live. Why did you engender me? Why did you? The wrongful lives are actions that are achieved. It's not science fiction. Our country, fortunately, in our country, this is more contained, but in the States, this is quite frequent. And something similar happens with the anti-birth movement. I remember a couple of years ago, he was suing the parents because a child that sued his parents because they didn't consult him to have him. But nothing is forced. Nobody is forced to something impossible. But how do you want to somebody be the culprit for you? But you have to assume that when you become the owner of the life of somebody else, or at least the beginning of the life of another being, it's quite logical, by the way. And finally, and maybe the most serious thing is the issue of the inequality suffered by the child with respect to his parents. Of course, we rule out, well, I do rule out to necessarily have an attitude that makes the parents who bring a child to birth and think about him as if a thing. But I'm not referring so much to that, but to the deep significance or meaning of the event itself in historical terms, of that enormous change of paradigm that we have assumed socially without too much thought about it. That some human beings are accountable for other human beings. This is something that is breaking equality, rupturing it, an equality that we do really expect among human beings. It's not a paradigm that you think demand about the relation of the creator and the creatures. But when this happens between peers, this is quite awful, because there is an asymmetry that is being created that is not logical, and a non-logical asymmetry with a non-reasonable inequality is a discrimination by definition. Inequality in treatment that has no reasonable basis or wise basis. And that break or rupture in the equality takes place necessarily when somehow that child who has been programmed has lost that contingency, as Habermas says, of his origin, as a basic requirement for freedom and the possibility of understand oneself in a comprehensive manner. Why am I here? What I'm doing here? The response, the possibility of being able to answer yourself these questions, being that is not contingent, can't be your father or another one similar to you or your mother. And that's where equality is broken, and the freedom as well. And if we don't want to see it, well, up to a certain degree, it's quite normal. But this is something that is there, and I believe that Habermas, from his approach, is quite right in insisting about this deep inequality that's generated between the different generations, and that is not that has no justification. And here comes a question: how can we make this generation of logic of being the masters, how to subtract it from this? How can we take it away from this rationale that produces undesired consequences and unexpected ones as well? I don't think that nobody in 1968 was going to think that all this could happen. But well, it is happening. And I'm not going to explain the essence of this philosophy, nor the moral condition and the philosophical content. But when I think about this, I remember this author, Max Scheler, who distinguishes domain and loving as two different ways of being in the world. There is not many more ways. He refers to, fundamentally in this work, to other issues, the attitude of the scientist and the philosopher, and that attitude that doesn't consist of being dominating but in loving is the moral condition of knowledge. That for him, the fact of knowing has moral requirements. But what I'm after now, and that I think it's worthwhile to point out, to subtract to the domination rationale has not too many different solutions that go into the logic and of love that is not blind. It has many eyes, and that reconnects us with the fact of being mother and being child. Everything that means an attitude of welcoming, receptivity, hospitality, to interrupting this will of dominating and power and just giving, well, the logic, the rationale of giving oneself. This attitude that really allows us to know things, as Max Scheler says in that fantastic work. It's also the one that allows us and opens to our condition of being fathers and children and sons, and that allows us to take up again and come back again to understand ourselves in the background of the relations between generations. How can I do that? You have 2 minutes left. Spemann says something else that is easy and simple that I like to remember it. The generation is opposed to production. He's not producing a child, but he's generating him whilst he's doing something else in the meantime. This sentence is loaded with meaning. And what do we, in the meantime? Well, what are we going to do? Well, I think many things can be done at the same time, something terrible. Sexual oppression, some immoral things, but at each point in time the issue is, where is my will going to? And what is not fair is that we see that the existence of another person is involved because her dignity is deeply damaged. At any rate, I believe that there are two issues here that are both sex and love, and this is what we do in the meantime. And what I think is that I don't know if it is strategically so or if it's a reality. It can be constructed to start by sex. I believe that the previous talk has been very subversive discourse that is quite punky. And I think that that's where we have to be. In the last slide, I showed again the graffiti. I think we have to retrieve that subversive meaning of sex and place it again in the right place, as Dr. Granada explained exactly. And love comes then because it's already there. And I think that sex everything that has to do with flesh, the theology of the body, do contain the solution to some of the problems that we have been talking about. Thank you very much.